Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, today, if you are listening to the mainstream media covering the course of the conflict, you will continue to hear two key themes. One is the level of casualties that the Russian military is taking, and to some extent there is reporting on alleged North Korean casualties in the hundreds in the Kursk region. And then you will also hear reports about Ukrainian drone and missile attacks, specifically drone attacks, deep inside the Russian Federation. Now, recently, there has been a series of attacks in Kherson. We have seen small, slow-moving Ukrainian drones carrying high explosives impact high-rise residential buildings inside of the city. Now, allegedly, the Ukrainians were targeting military industrial capacity. I believe there was a gunpowder factory that the Ukrainians, they had talked about going after. But from the video evidence that I have observed, the attack launched by the Ukrainians was mission specific to target several high-rise buildings in Kherson. The drones purposely attacked those buildings. The mission profile of those drones was very much clearly specific towards hitting those large residential buildings. Now, it's war. It's what's going to happen. Right? We've talked about this from the very beginning of the conflict, that this, given the fact that you have two very large industrial-sized nations, in the case of the Ukraine being backed by Western governments, this was going to be an incredibly nasty, long conflict. At the onset of this conflict, we were very specific in saying that this war was not going to be over in three days or 2 weeks or whatever people were talking about. That was simply not going to happen. Now, what is the media in the West not talking about? Well, we are reaching a point in this conflict right now in which the Ukrainian military, whether you're on the Russian side, whether you're on the Ukrainian side, whether you are an uninformed urbanite in San Francisco, it doesn't matter. The Ukrainian military is on the precipice of defeat. The Russians have launched a very successful Donbass offensive, which continues. Let's go back over to the actual Donbass map, and we can show you exactly what is happening as we speak. You can see another very large envelopment operation, a secondary envelopment operation that is getting ready to take place after the fall of Kharkova. Again, if we go back and we look exactly what has happened, especially the envelopment operations that took place to the southeast of Kharkova, and now we're looking at additional envelopment operations that are going to take place to the southwest of Kharkova. And let's zoom in and we can watch exactly what is transpiring. Complete and utter collapse of the Ukrainian military in the Donbass sector is happening. Now, additionally, what is not being talked about very much is Russian preparatory activity that is taking place in Heran. The Russians, over the past few months have and are initiating preparatory activity in which it appears the Russians are preparing for a crossing of the Dnipro River. It is reported that Russian forces are now massing near Oleshki and other areas, putting them in a position to conduct an operation to cross the Dnipro River. Now, what has facilitated this? It has been the ongoing Russian artillery and drone attacks that have eliminated the Ukrainian capacity to reinforce Kherson. If we go back over to the Rondelli map and we look at Kherson closer, and this is very important. You have the city of Kherson. Then around the city of Kherson, you have vast open spaces with very limited foliage, especially as we go into winter. The Ukrainian military, as it tries to move forces in and out, conduct rotations, supply support of the Ukrainian military in this urbanized city, has been susceptible to ongoing Russian Lancet drone attacks. This is one of the highest areas in the conflict in which long-range, and in some cases, classified Russian drone operations in terms of new systems that have been deployed, more advanced variants of the Lancet, in some cases with full autonomy and artificial intelligence guiding those weapon systems, are attacking Ukrainian forces as they try to move in and move out. On top of that, we have seen continued Russian artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, and ballistic missiles, cruise missiles continuing to strike high-valued Ukrainian military targets in Kherson. The morale of the territorial troops that are defending Kherson are at an all-time low. They are under constant pressure from Russian forces. Constant pressure. Now, we may be reaching a point where, now, additionally, we've also heard reports that the Ukrainians are now stripping down some of its air defense units to redeploy some of those personnel and air defense units into actual frontline infantry units. So the manpower situation in the Ukrainian military is just absolutely dire. The forces that the Ukrainians have defending Kherson, for the most part, are territorial defense units with some Marine units as well. There's not a very large force construct that if the Russians were to mass forces and then attempt a crossing, that it is highly probable, given the state of the Ukrainian military, a successful crossing and seizure of Kherson could take place. Now, we're not saying that is about to happen, but what the Russians are doing in terms of preparatory action and activity in and around Kherson, it seems like the Russians are preparing for the eventuality of recrossing the Dnipro River. Look, it is very important for the Russians in terms of war goals, war aims, especially at the onset of this conflict and where the conflict sits now, Odessa. Odessa is very important for the Russian Federation. The Russians want Odessa back. Now, are they going to get Odessa back? Difficult to say. If there is a general collapse in the Ukrainian military, and look, everything points right now to that happening. If you look at what is happening in Kharkova, the Kharkova pocket, Hanavika, and the Russian continued operations toward Pokrovsk, all signs point towards that general collapse. And this is going to be an incredibly important winter in this war. And then with the onset of spring and then summer of next year, it could be a very, very tough road for the Ukrainians, especially with the transfer of power, possibly here in the United States. We'll have to see what happens. A lot of strange activity going on right now. The folks that are in power clearly do not want to leave. Not the insane person who is the mentally ill, unfit individual that is currently in the White House. The individuals behind that individual. They do not want to give up power. So we'll have to watch very closely what is happening. There's some disturbing things that are ongoing, especially if you watch this conflict, if you watch these Western weapon systems now attacking targets inside the Russian Federation that otherwise would not have occurred. Again, at the onset of this conflict, even leading up to the conflict, there would have never been any discussion about ATACMS, Storm Shadows hitting targets deep inside the Russian Federation. Again, those strikes, the intelligence, the data inputs into those weapon systems only point one direction, and that's west. Again, the Ukrainians are simply a proxy force for what the Russians are dealing with. And again, feel free to go back, look at history, look at what has happened, what has occurred in terms of NATO expansion, and then finally, what if NATO were to expand in Ukraine? What happens after that? Where does NATO go from there? It's purpose-driven. But again, watching very closely what is happening in Kharkova. The pocket has collapsed, with additional pockets being formed and development operations being formed by the Russians. We have seen over the course of the last 24-48 hours, a massive missile strike against command and control elements within the Ukrainian military in Kiev. We believe this was a very successful ballistic missile attack and cruise missile attack by Russian forces. There's also continued possibility of the Russians using the new ballistic missile system that they've used in the past to possibly target additional Ukrainian targets. But we'll continue to watch that very closely. But again, watching operations near Kherson, the continued preparatory work for a possible recrossing of the Dnipro River, the possibility of continued offensive operations in the direction of Zaporizhia, Kyiv, and then obviously the main Russian effort as we speak that continues is the Donbass offensive, and then you obviously have what we're also watching is the Kursk potato field sideshow. Again, the Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian military members, the reports, anecdotal reports that are coming out of this area indicate that the Ukrainian military is incredibly unhappy. Battalion commanders, company commanders, incredibly unhappy about its forces being deployed in Kursk. They see it as an absolutely waste of capability. But we're going to continue to watch that as well. As always, thank you for joining us. More to come very soon. Have a good day.